Hello, everybody, and welcome to the OSINT Project's interview with Dan Nemec. We're really happy to have him on here with us, and I'm thrilled to introduce myself and some of our OSINT members. I'm Michael Hoffman, and I go by Webbreacher Online, and I would love to pass this over to Nico. Say hi, Nico.
Hey everybody, my name is Nico Dekens. I go online by the handle of Dutch_OSINT guy. And let me hand it over to Ines.
Hi everyone, Ines Narciso, IWN_LX on Twitter. Nice to be with everyone. Really interested in what Dan has to say.
Cool. And Christina?
Hi everyone, my name is Cristina Leccardi and I go online by Cristina Leccardi and I pass it on to Laurent.
Thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Laurent. I go by the handle @LaurentBodo and I have the honor today to introduce our interviewee who is Dan Nemec. So thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who don't know Dan, so Dan, he works as a software developer and he kind of like discovered the world of OSINT in late 2018. He loves to code and also software and websites, and he loves to dig into this. And one of his favorite things about the OSINT community is its friendliness and also the culture of sharing ideas to lift up the community and also make everyone better investigations. And this is also something we will talk about today. So first of all, Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And so to start off, so we usually do this by asking our interviews, like, tell us your story. How did you get into the OSINT world?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I came in from the more technology side and the computer programming side. I went to school, got a computer science degree. I've been working in software for almost 9 years now. And a couple of years ago, I think it was Caitlin Bowden. I found one of her posts on my Twitter account, just scrolling by, and she was talking about her work into the non-consensual image abuse or revenge porn, and using, she was sharing some stories about how she found people who were sharing other women's photos using OSINT techniques. And then through that, I kind of found some threads to other people's OSINT accounts. And the whole thing is just so interesting. Reading about that, and so that's kind of how I got into OSINT and how I found the community. And since then, been reading through people's Twitter posts, reading through the Discord chats, the Rocket chat. It's been really great to learn from everybody.
So I can hear a lot about curiosity, which I think we share the same story basically. Mm-hmm. And what were you doing before that? So before you came into contact with OSINT, because you have a really technical background. And I think we're going to also talk about Python later on, and also for our podcast listeners. So make sure to follow Dan on Twitter. His handle is @DJ_Nemec.
Yep.
So what were you doing before that?
So in college, I studied C++, pretty much the entire time. In school, and then in my own free time, I learned some Python, just because it was, it's a fun language. It's easy to get started with, looks a little bit like English, and so I really enjoyed learning it as kind of a complement to the kind of really complicated C++. And from there, in my work at my regular work, I do .NET development, not a whole lot of Python, but I do a lot of kind of hobby work and work on my own, and most of that is in Python. And so I spend a lot of time building up my skills there and practicing on stuff.
So did you learn Python on your own pace? You taught it yourself, or did you follow courses for it?
Mostly taught myself. I was very lucky, very privileged to be able to have that time. in college when I wasn't doing homework or studying, that I could spend some time and kind of just playing with things on my own. And mostly it was taking what I knew from C++ and say, I know how to do this in C++, how do I do this in Python? And then Googling for kind of the equivalent, and then kind of learning from there, looking at documentation, of course, and reading through that. I don't think I took any courses specifically.
So for me, because that's a question a lot of people in the open source intelligence community ask, they want to learn Python, and you just told us you taught yourself. So you learned a coding language first, being C++. You shifted over to Python because it's similar to C++, because some listeners may not know the similarity. So how can you move over from one coding language to another?
So there are different classes of programming languages. I would say that C++ is kind of similar to your C# and your Java, more so than it is to Python in terms of kind of the syntax and some of the features that it has. But C++ is lower level because the other languages, they kind of handle a lot of things for you, like memory management, stuff that when you're working in Python, you just kind of ignore and just assume that it works. But still some of the concepts like creating objects or calling methods, functions, reading documentation for features and things like that is the kind of concepts that are almost universal between languages. And so when you know how to program in one language, you kind of understand the way that you need to I guess write the code and get it to work, and even debugging, seeing error messages, understanding what that means actually to how you change your code. And those skills, once you know one language, it depends on the language whether it's super easy or more difficult to translate to a different language. But it really helps knowing at least one programming language to be able to learn something new.
Yeah, and if you, I mean, just to go along with that, once you know a language, like in the real world here, English or Spanish or Portuguese or whatever, understanding other related languages makes it easier. Those more distinct are extremely challenging. Like, I know English, learning Mandarin, it's going to take me a long time because there's a lot of different vocabulary, a lot of different syntax. And I think, would you agree that within the world of programming languages, some, like you mentioned, are a little bit closer to English and just writing what you want versus defining other types of things about it, like lower level things. Some make it easy for you to just get in there and do stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. In college, I was forced to do some weird languages that I still don't even, it's really hard to comprehend them. But something like Python, where you're typing, if Nemec is in list of strings or whatever, it's almost like English, and being able to have just kind of a basic understanding of Python and an understanding of English, you could kind of see how the two concepts go together versus having to understand some strange symbols that actually mean equals or inside of or that kind of thing.
So you have on your GitHub page, you have over 100 repositories. Now, I know that some of those are not your code. They're code that other people have written that you found interesting and you forked their projects. But I do know that you have some projects of your own that are pretty interesting to the OSINT world. Are there any that you want to, maybe mention here?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, that is a lot of projects, I know. It's kind of, one thing that I really like about the software community is open source and free software, which is kind of, there's kind of competing theories on that between letting closed source companies take your code and use that like inside Google to profit from your code, or or using what's called copyleft to kind of ensure that people who are using your code keep their changes open and free to everybody to use. But that's something that I like as well. And through that, a lot of the code that I write, even if it's not going to be, really important to anybody but me, I upload that on my GitHub account, just kind of as a backup for one thing, and just to have it out there in case somebody wants to use it sometime or find something through it. But yeah, as far as OSINT related stuff,
so how about I recently discovered your was it now I forgot the name. It's the Snapchat map scraper.
Yeah, the Snapchat map.
So can you tell us what made you come up with that code? What was the initial idea? What triggers you to write it?
Sure.
And can you describe what the tool does as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Snapchat map scraper, what this does is, if you're not familiar with the Snapchat map, people who are listening to this, it basically shows a map of the world and shows little hotspots in a dark heat map, a dark red heat map of where people are posting on Snapchat and where people are sharing their videos publicly. And so basically what I was thinking when I built that was this was during the George Floyd protests, the unrest that was going through the entire US. And what I was thinking was, hey, we have this Snapchat map. What if something happens on Snapchat, it gets recorded, and we want to save that data without having to, have somebody looking at Snapchat map 24/7, just trying to find something. And so I dug into kind of the code behind Snapchat, their map system, and then wrote the program. Basically, it goes through, you give it a list of geolocations of where you want to search for these snaps. And then it repeatedly kind of looks for what new snaps are there at this location. And for all of those, it just downloads them into a folder on your PC. And then there's also a very basic kind of review function to look for, interesting things, whether it's people posting their food, whatever, you can kind of filter that out. But it's eventually you're going to collect, hundreds of these videos. Some of them may be relevant, some of them may not be relevant. And so, yeah, it lets you kind of collect all of that, look at it later, and then see what's interesting for the purpose that you're trying to capture this data.
Yeah, I found it really interesting and very useful because recently we had some riots in the Netherlands due to the COVID evening clock restrictions, where a lot of people were not that fond of, which made them go loot and riot. And I was just interested to see, hey, how can I preserve data as quick as I can from Snapchat maps? Why? Because those videos will be gone mostly within 24 hours. And I'm only one person with one laptop, and I can do very fast clicking because but I cannot grab all the things. And this is basically, I readily went to GitHub and I was like, Snapchat map, let's see what's out there on GitHub. And I ended up on your GitHub. I'm like, oh, Nemec, I know that name. I'm like, it should be good. And I tested it out and it worked perfectly. And I was like, yay, thank you for sharing that. And that's, I think, what I was curious about. And also what I found interesting, because I know a lot of people do like to learn how to code in Python. So that was my next step after all the panic was over. Now let's look at his code. What can I learn from it? How did he code that stuff? What kind of triggers did he build in there that are able to pull based on coordinates those videos? So really interesting. Yeah, absolutely.
This also leads me to another question, because as Nico just said, I also learn from other people's codes going through it. And one of the questions I also often hear and also get is, do I have to, so especially from people who just entered the world of OSINT, and they are asking, do I have to learn Python? Because I think sometimes there's a confusion, because you read a lot about Python, you read a lot about OSINT, and these are two very separate worlds, but also interlinked. So you, with your background, what would you advise? What advice would you give to someone who's just entered the world of OSINT? Should I learn Python first? Should I learn OSINT first? Should I learn both at the same time? What would you say?
So I would say that Python is maybe not the top priority. If you don't have to learn Python, you can use any language. If your goal is to write tools and automate the work that you're doing, you can use it really any language you want, whichever one that you think you would like most. You can definitely use those languages to automate. If you're looking to extend other people's tools, it does seem that Python is kind of the biggest and most popular in this community. And so definitely learning Python can't hurt. Being able to learn from other people's code and contribute to it and extend it for other uses. Python definitely good.
You mentioned, Dan, that Python seems to be very close. It's sort of close to, okay, more close than C and C# and C++ to just written English. And that's one of the things that I love about it, is that when I get into somebody else's code, like your Snapchat stuff, I just look through it for things I know about, like HTTPS. If I just search through the whole document for HTTPS, I'll find many of the places that your code goes to. And then I think, well, can I replicate that in my browser? Can I see how he's making those web requests? So kind of starting with something that I know about and then seeing how you've managed to retrieve it or interact with it. That's one of the ways that I started getting into coding too. And then I'm like, well, I can just copy Dan's code, then go and cite that he actually was the one that wrote it. And then, start using that to make my own requests. I agree with you, man. It's a lower barrier with Python than some of the other more classic programming languages. But I mean, you got to have a reason to do it too, right? I mean, you can do every Python tutorial out there, but if you don't have I wonder if I can grab all the videos off of Snapchat map, then that you're missing the point of automation. Yeah,
having that internal drive to learn more for a purpose, I think helps a lot. Yeah. Someone saying, coding is good, I want to learn coding, is kind of, I mean, obviously it's nice to hear, but having a focus on something that you actually want to learn and a goal to get from nothing to something is, I think, definitely will help you to learn and focus on what you want to learn. But Micah, you mentioned a really good point about starting with what you know and what you can understand when focusing on code. And that, even beyond that, once you know how to code, if you're looking at other people's code, that's actually a very, very good technique for digging into some new code that you don't know, you don't understand. Maybe it's really complicated, really nested and twisted, but you want to understand it and pick out the different, pick out how it works, understand how it works, and then maybe replicate it later. Kind of like what I did with taking Snapchat Map, which has a lot of JavaScript code that I don't understand, and then taking out really the important parts and putting that into Python. But really, that's kind of the exact kind of same thing that I do when pulling the data out of someone else's, like a Facebook or a Snapchat.
So when you see something like Snapchat and you have that question, that's the part that I get excited about. It's like, I wonder if I could download all of these and monitor an area and store all that offline. I wonder if I could do whatever, analyze all this data. When you get those, I wonder if, what's your kind of next step in looking at the code? Are you using web developer tools in the browser? Are you doing other things or just clicking around? What is your thought process for how do you explore some website that's got interesting content?
Yeah, so when it comes to that, I would say that the web developer tools are absolutely incredible, what they can do these days and how they've evolved over time. It's just, I mean, it makes things so easy. I remember, I think in college I remember reading for the first time that someone had released an an extension for Firefox called Firebug that was the original web developer tool. And it didn't exist in Chrome, didn't exist in Internet Explorer, but you could actually dig into what was behind the website instead of just looking at the plain source.
Yep.
And over time now, it's evolved into what it is now. But it's incredibly powerful for looking at what the page is doing, what code is running, debugging that code. But when I'm kind of thinking of what do I want to do first, the idea, what I keep in my head is there's nothing magic about code. Whatever is running on your PC, it has to basically, come from the server, Facebook server, Snapchat server. Those instructions come from that server onto your server over the network. And so whatever instructions you need to run, it's on that wire between the network. And so if you can look in your browser dev tools, look at the network tab and see exactly what's coming over that wire, then you know it's in there somewhere. And you can start with looking for, like you said, HTTP. This coming in a video, right? It's going to be a URL somewhere. So look for those video kind of URLs. Look for playlist URLs, trying to find what you're looking for. And then once you find that URL, where did they come up with that URL? You kind of take one step back to what code created that URL? How did they know which video to pick up? And another thing you can do is literally just click around on things and say, okay, I clicked on this. How did it respond? What did it send to the server? What instructions is it requesting back? And then say you want to get someone's tweets. You click on their username, look in the network tab, and it shows you, the tweets. It shows you the tweets from the user, and it says, tweets for screen name DJ Nemec. And you think, okay, this is for DJ Nemec's tweets. What if I copy that request, change the screen name, and then do it again with someone else's screen name? Will it give me someone else's tweets? And then you kind of...
See, that's one of the interesting things, though, Dan, is because you have that base knowledge. You have that broader knowledge of programming, of how things on the web work, which is so important for open source intelligence, because most of what we do is, well, on web pages, right? I mean, yes, there's other open source, but we don't really pay attention to that. But there's so much that if you understand the basics of how things communicate on the web, you understand how web pages are kind of put together, you understand all of that, then dissecting how a certain target website works is so much easier. Now, some people look at it and go, that's black magic. That is hacking. Oh my God, you're not. We're just looking at what's happening in our browsers that is automatic and doing that stuff manually. Or am I right? Or
that's basically it. Yeah, you're taking basically a lot of what I do is copying a request that the web page makes already.
Yep.
Copying all the cookies, copying all the headers, all of that, and then breaking it down into what's absolutely important for this request to be success. If I take this out and it fails, then it's required. If it's not, then I can, ignore it. It's superfluous. And then distill that into code and just kind of replicate it in Python, for example.
Doesn't this way of thinking have a lot of similarities with an investigative mindset, trying to understand how things work, how to get to the bottom of something?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels. And Christina, you bring up a great point that and Dan, see if this resonates with you, or Nico too. When I'm looking at a website and trying to figure out the OSINT, my brain is using that logical analysis that I learned from programming, the for loops to iterate over things, the if-then statements, all of the conditionals and evaluations that I would normally put into like a Python script. If I do this, then what happens if I do that? That an analytical approach, I think, is very analogous between programming and investigations. Yes? No?
Yeah, I like to agree. Yeah, absolutely. And especially for web pages, it's basically like a several-stage rocket. You can look for the information that you can see, then you can look for the information that's under the hood, maybe the source code, and then you can look for the third stage of the rocket in the developer tools, and maybe the traffic that flows through it. And with that, you can extract the information, because the information is already there, but it's not always visible. And you make it visible by extracting it using, for instance, Python code. Or at least that's how I like to look at web pages.
Dan, I wanted to ask you if in the last years, have you seen like a difference on how platforms see this kind of work on basically what they're... So, because we've witnessed, of course, like in the OSINT community, that sometimes we almost feel that they're listening. Like if there's, we wouldn't call it a glitch, but if there's like something that for us is let us see a little bit under the hood, then eventually it will disappear. And what do you feel the trend is right now? Do you think are they listening? Are they trying to, do they see this as something they don't want? What's your feeling?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a tug of war between what we like to have access to as investigators and what's useful to us versus also bad actors who use this for bad things. And then the people who maintain these, I guess the backend APIs that run these tools, it can be caught in being used for bad things, and then eventually they take it away. And yeah, I do think there's probably at least somebody out there who's looking for either their services being used, I don't know about OSINT specifically, but looking for their services being used somewhere on GitHub or on Twitter, and then saying, oh, well, we don't want this, and let's cut this off, as we obviously saw with Facebook in the last couple of years. And I know Twitter used to have much better APIs maybe 5 years ago, and now they're not so great anymore. There's definitely a trend of people removing information from their services and kind of keeping it all in-house versus letting kind of freer access to third parties.
And it's mostly due to abuse, right? It's not due to that we are trying to do open source intelligence for good. How I look at it, that these things changed, is that people scraped stuff en masse, scaled it up so huge that they were basically knocking down servers or whatever.
Yeah, that's definitely true. If you remember Michael Basil, his tools that were online, they got knocked off offline a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, due to abuse. People were abusing his services, and then Facebook eventually sent him, I think it was Facebook maybe, sent him a cease and desist to make him take those off. But yeah, definitely these things get abused by people looking to use them for the wrong thing.
Can I also ask you a question about, your thought process? So you discover something and you would like to share it with the community. And I see the same way, that I know that this new thing I discovered benefits the majority in the community. And of course, there are always bad people who will exploit this or whatever. But at the same time, especially what Ines said is very important. And I think the same, that everyone's watching. So let's say you found something cool and you want to share it. Like, are you sharing it instantly, or are you thinking about it? Maybe someone could use it, and by sharing it, I kind of like disable it for others? Or what is your thinking in terms of before you publish something?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. For the most part, I don't really keep things private necessarily to kind of hoard it for my own use. That's not really the kind of person that I am. Obviously, I don't do OSINT for a living. It's just kind of a hobby for me. So I'm not using these techniques in my own personal work for profit. But also, I like to, share with other people, help other people learn and understand and use the techniques. And so I do, I may think about it and should I be sharing this? But definitely I default to the idea of why shouldn't I share this? if it seems useful to other people, then I kind of want to share it with others.
Yeah, I think this is a debate that most of us in the community have when we are about to publish something, whether this is an article or a tool. And it has kept me personally a little bit awake at night, like what's going to happen if I share this piece of information and it falls into the wrong hands. On the other hand, I've had a few conversations about this, and the analogy of the knife pops in many times. Like, you haven't heard of it? Laurent has. For example, yeah, you are a producer or like the inventor of the knife, and you put it out in the market for people to cut their vegetables, and some will cut their vegetables and feed their family, use it for good anyway, for whatever practical reasons, and there will always be a portion of the population that will pick up that knife and murder someone. Are you responsible for the way people are using the information or tools you provide them with? It's a rather philosophical debate in the end of the day.
It sounds philosophical. However, when we move into the realm of hacking and when we move into the realm of cyber exploitation, there are countries out there that have taken the knife essentially and say, this knife is something that is dangerous, and we are going to hold you responsible for whatever anybody does with it. And really, I mean, what we do in society is say that knife, if used in this way, is the dangerous, illegal, forbidden way and thing to do. So I think the challenge is when you have an international thing like the internet, where content might be hosted in multiple countries, whose laws, and I'm not a lawyer here, and maybe some of you know more than me, whose laws do you need to be concerned about when Dan writes a tool to harvest data from Snapchat, and Snapchat's on some content delivery network all around the world? He might be scraping data from some other country where it might not be legal to do that. Or, I mean, it gets really complicated. And Dan, I'm not putting you on the spot. I've written scraper tools too, and I mean, this is the things that we do as in OSINT, but it gets really complicated, and maybe we need to get a lawyer on here.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a lawyer.
Okay,
I don't know, I don't know anything about the legalities of that, other than kind of in the U.S. There was recently a lawsuit between some scraping company and LinkedIn lost that, basically because their content was public, that company was legally allowed to scrape LinkedIn for that information. But yeah, as you said, it's, this stuff's all over the world. The people who are posting these are in different countries whose laws apply, and where is it legal, where is it not legal? That's definitely a big question that I don't know the answer to.
So I have another question for you. We talked about your background in IT and you learning coding languages, moving over to Python and getting interested, basically, you said 2018, if I remember correct, into the open source intelligence field. What triggered you to get interested in let's say, the OSINT-curious world?
So I guess the idea of, I like investigating websites and digging into the source code of things, finding out how it works, and then seeing that people were looking into investigations of people, companies digging into the, I guess Bellingcat was probably a big one as well, looking at some of their research into, I think it was Russian poisoning back in maybe early 2019. They posted about that, and that was just so interesting to read, both about what they found and how they found it, kind of what they dug through, the different data sources and finding all of that. And so yeah, it was really interesting to read. I know when I was a young child, I think one of the you ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? And one of my things when I was a young child was like a detective, because I like investigating things and digging into stuff. Obviously, I never did that. I'm just a software guy. But
now you can.
Yeah, exactly. I can kind of combine my technology experience with the investigative mindset and insights, and it's really interesting to learn about.
So do you come up with your own investigations nowadays? So we all know you can code, and you help, for instance, also for inspiration for Techniset. She heavily used your Qgis, that is about the base 64 decoding and encoding of Facebook, basically querying. Do you do your own research as well? So let's say you were interested in, you told the George Floyd incident. Is that just purely interest, or do you also participate in, let's say, volunteer groups or something?
Not a whole lot. I did a Trace Labs CTF once for the missing persons CTF, but most of it's just kind of a hobby. Just kind of, I see something that interests me, and I want to build it, and I want to go from not having that experience to having some experience. And one thing that I like about writing code and like that, so is reusing it. So if there's, in the future, there's something that I want to investigate, and I think, oh, I wrote this code, a year ago that does this really related thing that I want to look at, I can go back to that and repurpose it for my new thing. And so I do that a lot with my coding, kind of just preparing a base.
So when let's dive a little bit deeper into that, because one, you mentioned you are a hobbyist. This is not your full-time job. Are there things that kind of just interest you? Now, you have a background, like Nico said, and like you've said, in some of the core technologies of how the internet works. So you've got a firm basis for understanding the web. When you see something, do you have this like question that goes off in your mind, and then you're like, ooh, I wonder if I could do this? Or is it more of like a low simmer, like, hey, I think this would be helpful type of thing? Or what is your like next step once you get that aha moment? What do you do next? Or is there anything, or am I just making stuff up? Because I could just make stuff up, and that happens.
So yeah, I guess for the George Floyd thing, it was just kind of, I was curious to what, I live in the US, and so I was kind of thinking, what's it like where I live? Are there protests? Are there anything going on, abuse, that kind of thing? And so I guess what I was thinking was, well, I don't want to go and click on Snapchat map every 45 minutes looking for stuff. And so I was like, well, let's take a few hours, code up this thing to automatically sweep all the videos, and then I'll just review it later and see what's going on. Cool. Kind of a way for me to keep up with what was happening in my local community.
And that's what automation should do, right? Make your life easier, so you're not doing what Nico said, the clicking and refreshing, and it frees you up to do other things like analysis instead of the collection.
I do have to get a lot better at that, though. I'm very good at data collection, I guess, but I don't have quite as much experience, since I don't do this for a living, at the analysis side and taking.
But see, that's where and I mean, you mentioned this earlier, that your successes sometimes are based upon the successes or failures of other people. Matthias Wilson published this great thing on video analysis in Microsoft's Azure cloud and how to do that. Once you have all of those MP4s that you've downloaded, now marrying that with Matthias's project, now you can, you take the chocolate, you take the peanut butter, you put it together, and you got yourself a really nice snack there. So that's one of the things I always like doing, is getting something and going, okay, I have all this stuff. What's my next step? And does there need to be, or am I off onto another project? Because I would imagine that there's a lot of distraction that sometimes come in. You're like, oh, I finished the Snapchat thing. Now there's, Parlay is over here. And there's Gab. And look at this. And do you do that too? Like test out try a little system to see what's there?
Yeah. Sometimes a lot of just little things, don't really take it too far. For like the Gab and Parler, it's, sometimes it's just too much. I don't have that much time to go and look into every little thing. And so I try to use my time when I have it.
And as a hobbyist, one of the Christina, did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
I wanted to add a small point, but it's fine.
Okay.
I think that what comes through from this conversation as a message as well is that you can be a hobbyist and yet contribute to the community and contribute to the people that are actually doing investigations and do something that matters. Although you don't get paid for it and you just do it for fun, it still can matter substantially for others.
Yeah, I'm grateful that people find it interesting
yeah.
and find it useful.
Yeah. Absolutely. And well, and I was actually going to ask you about that too, is that's how I got into OSINT too. I was in cybering and during the day I would do certain things. And then at night for, 2 to 8 hours, I'd be like, oh, I could grab all of the things from this site or that site, or I can do this. And I would be trying things and experimenting and really, that was like the fun part of my day was after I clocked out of work. Not asking you to tell us if you like your job or not, but do you find that too? Like sometimes you just get into your investigation or that I could do this capability type of thing and time passes?
Yes, absolutely. It comes and goes, but there are times where I'm, from 11 p.m. until 4 a.m. kind of just coding on some ideas.
Jeez.
Like recently it was somebody on the Discord, the Searchlight Discord had posted about creating a Tor or an onion scraper. And so I was like, well, could I do this? It seems interesting. And building a scraper and a search engine off of that. So you could actually, search for keywords inside darknet resources. And so I kind of, over a couple of days, just kind of banged out a very basic, a very simple, going from nothing to collecting, I guess, have an input list of onion websites, collecting data, indexing data, and then a search engine to type in your keywords and get something back. And so, yeah, definitely hours of investigation and building stuff like that.
And I'm hearing that you build things modularly too, because I do the same thing. I'm like, okay, this tool needs to make a web request and get something back and analyze it. Okay, I did that in this tool. Let me take that and put it over here, and then just reusing those code modules. Very cool.
Yeah, breaking down the question and that. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Well, then. Yeah, so Ines, Christina, would you like to add something, or do you want to say something? Any other questions?
I'm uncovered. It has been pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting. And I really also enjoyed the discussion around Python because we spoke about Python a lot. Also in other webcasts episodes last year. And I think it becomes, or it is already a very important topic, and a lot of people are interested. So it's great to have someone like you on our show to talk about how it is really to work in the IT industry and combine it with OSINT. And I also just want to point out to our listeners, so I'm gonna, so definitely make sure to follow Dan on Twitter. His handle is @DJ Nemec with a C at the end. That's DJ Nemec with a C at the end. And also check out his GitHub page because he's got a bunch of cool stuff on there, such as the snap map scraper that Nico mentioned earlier. So that's also here on this website, github.com/Nemec with a C, github.com/Nemec. And yeah, so thank you so much for joining us. And what we always do, so we always have a last question for all our interviews. Which is there anything else, or not is there anything else, but what's the next thing that you would love to learn?
So one thing that I've been looking at, there was a tutorial on learning Qgis, kind of it's a desktop application for kind of investigating geographic things, GeoInt, that kind of thing. So I'd love to learn more about that. Geolocation. I saw you guys were playing that Geoguessr game a few weeks ago, and I've been playing that as well now, and it's pretty fun. That and kind of getting better at the the analysis side of taking what I found, what I've learned, and actually applying that to an analysis, because that's obviously a very important part of the OSINT cycle, the intelligence cycle.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yep. All right, then, yeah, Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.